So the Smile have dropped their third album. It's called Cutouts. We reviewed that last week. A lot of comments coming through about whether this is better than Wall of Eyes and, in fact, better than A Light for Attracting Attention. Lots of different views on that. So today we thought we would discuss what we thought was the best one to see if you agree. Good morning to you, Al. Hope everything's well. What are your initial thoughts, mate?
Good morning, mate. Well, unfortunately, due to the chaos that was kind of the end of COVID, we didn't actually get to review the first album. So I've actually only listened to Cutout and Wall of Eyes in its entirety. And you've been banging on to me for months to listen to the first album from start to finish, because I had heard the singles. And, mate, it's pretty hard to fault. Like most bands, the debut album's always pretty good. And this is up there, mate. This is one of the best albums I've heard for a long time. There's some particular favourites. I think The Smoke is one of the greatest songs they've done. It's pretty hard to fault from start to finish, mate. What are your thoughts? Because there were some interesting comments. Yeah, let's look at that.
Let's be honest. Yeah, I do too. Look, I think that A Light for Attracting Attention. It really came out of the blue when it did come out. I must admit I wasn't as pumped when it came out because I wasn't as in love with the Thom Yorke solo stuff compared to Radiohead. When it did come out and I tripped over it, I was fascinated by it. And I have different favourite songs almost every time I listen to the album. So at the moment I like Free in the Knowledge. It's probably been always one of my more favourite songs, and it's probably one of my favourite Radiohead / Smile songs, so even as a combined thing. We don't know what tomorrow brings. I mean, that's a track later in the album. The Opposite. There's just every single track seems to be a great track. Where it probably comes down a little bit is that I think it gets criticism for being a little bit to throw everything up against the wall, but I don't think that really matters so much. And I think this was almost like a COVID album on Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood's part. But let's go to the next album. So skip forward a couple of years. Now, I wasn't 100% sure that The Smile was going to be a one and done type of a thing, and then I'm going to go back to Radiohead. We were pleased to see that there was going to be a second album. Wall of Eyes came out earlier this year. This was your, I guess, introduction to The Smile. I really thought this was a pretty credible second album.
Oh, mate, couldn't agree more. The actual title track, Wall of Eyes, opening up is absolutely sensational. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this video, because there was some commentary around that particular song being a little bit drab and a bad intro to an album, whereas I just don't really understand that. I think it's a great intro for an album and a single leading into Teleharmonic. I guess the rest of the album for me was not a letdown, but it wasn't as good as the first album, other than Bending Hectic, which kind of towards the end of the album kind of brought the album back. But I definitely don't think it's as strong as the first album. But you've got to remember, this is an album within a year or so. Like, these guys are pumping out stuff, and you kind of, I don't know if you'd agree with this, you kind of get that feel like it's just three musicians in a room just kind of jamming, and then Thom Yorke and his genius kind of shifts with the lyrics and the chord changes and the progressions to make it into songs that work really well. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's probably Jonny Greenwood as well.
Oh,
his
yeah,
influence
definitely.
as well. I mean, I think that they're both very much in cahoots with this. This one, if I wanted to summate, it had a little bit more acoustics to it and piano. So Friend of a Friend, I love that song. But then you have Read the Room, which is not necessarily like that. So you say that, well, this is the acoustic album, but it wasn't necessarily. It probably was better produced, I think, than the first album. But you do have a ton of really good, solid tracks with that particular album. Even when you go back to it, and I did this during the week. I've been listening to Cutouts, went back to Wall of Eyes. I thought, oh look, I forgot about Read the Room, for example, where they go back to a little bit more of the 90s Radiohead style in some ways. It's almost back to the Bends in some ways.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good album. And then, of course, Cutouts came out in the same year, last week. Third album now. I mean, Radiohead haven't done 3 albums. I mean, I think they've done 3 albums in about 17 years or so. This one also, I think, had a point of difference for me, that it did have a much more electronic type of a focus. So Zero Sum felt like that. It was almost a little bit of a kraut rock type of a vibe to it. But even saying that, they all sort of share similar DNA. So in terms of, you can't really classify the album as something, because you sort of say that and then there's a track that does something different.
Yeah, I'd agree with most of that, mate. I do think that there's a bit of a feeling that this were the kind of the offcuts or the cutouts from the recordings of Wall of Eyes. And I did kind of think, imagine if they did just pump out a double album and have... It would have been interesting to do. But look, I mean, it's still pretty solid. Zero Sum is a particular favourite off mine, and don't get me started. But I guess that leads to the conversation, mate. If we were to rate them, what are your thoughts? If we're doing a 3-2-1 here, just to satisfy the comments out there.
Which horse would I go for? Well, look, I think that A Light for Attracting Attention would be my favourite one. I think that Cutouts just gets Wall of Eyes for me at the moment, and Wall of Eyes comes in a close third. It's very difficult. I feel as if sometimes I chop and change. I think that it feels like A Light for Attracting Attention. That album is the result of a burst of ideas. You're getting really, really good ideas. They're not too cute with trying to make things perfect, and I think that's what makes it a good album.
I couldn't agree more.
I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, no, I would. And it's always, it's hard to beat a debut album, especially if it's a collection of ideas that you've been toying with for a while. I'd definitely say the debut album's the best, but I would have to say Wall of Eyes, to me, would nudge out Cutouts and probably nudge it by a good bump. I mean, it's always hard to pick your favourite album like your favourite child, but we all do it. So that would be my kind of thoughts there. It'd be interesting to know in the comments what people think and whether they would agree with us or have a different point of view.